Hello, friends of Tangled Hearts. Welcome to our channel, where stories of love and passion unfold. Let's begin our exciting journey into the world of human relationships. Part 1. Naomi was over the moon with joy upon being accepted into the medical faculty of a prestigious university. Of course, what else could a girl from the province dream of, where most can't even finish a vocational school or technical college, let alone obtain higher education, especially in medicine? Not only is the profession always in demand and prestigious, but it also offers a decent salary. But what Naomi was most thrilled about was that she would finally live in the city. Here, there are plenty of opportunities, numerous entertainments, and, after all, the city has a metro. Naturally, living in a remote village, the girl was deprived of all these pleasures. But most importantly, Naomi had dreamt of becoming a doctor since childhood, to heal people and help them. Naomi never had problems with her studies, memorizing any subject was never a particular challenge for her, and everything came quite easily. It's also worth noting that Naomi was very beautiful, with her sweet face and a slender figure like a sculpted statuette, coupled with her great intelligence. It was no surprise that she never lacked suitors. That in her third year, she met Stephen. It all happened like in the movies. They were walking towards each other on the street, and he accidentally bumped into Naomi, scattering the numerous books she always carried for her studies. Stephen, being a decent person, couldn't just walk by. He knelt to help Naomi, and their hands touched over the anatomy textbooks. In that moment, Naomi and Stephen realized they were meant for each other, and a passionate romance ensued. Stephen deserves a more detailed introduction. Naturally handsome, with incredible charm and charisma, he drove all the girls in the area crazy. However, his upbringing, coming from a cultured family, didn't allow him to treat girls as mere playthings for amusement. But when he saw Naomi, he knew he was ready to spend the rest of his life with her. Honest to God, before they knew it, Naomi was standing at her graduation photo session with a beautiful red diploma and a gold medal, and on the ring finger of her right hand sparkled an engagement ring. Years passed, and the once newlyweds settled into family routine: home, work, work, home. There wasn't even time to think about children. To develop herself and not just focus on household and work problems, Naomi decided to start going to the gym. After researching the options, she found one with an amazing complex that included a gym, swimming pool, and sauna. Initially, Naomi decided to visit it 3 times a week. After some time, Naomi began to notice that when she worked out in the gym and then went to relax in the pool, the swimming instructor paid her extra attention. Undoubtedly, there was something to notice when Naomi entered the room, as most men watched her with interest. Nevertheless, Naomi gave no slightest indication of hoping for anything more with the instructor. By the way, Naomi learned that his name was Vincent. Naturally, he looked exactly as a fitness instructor should: robust, fairly attractive, and, of course, every muscle of his body seemed to be cast from bronze. Each time Naomi came to the pool, she felt Vincent's gaze on her. She couldn't even think of cheating on Stephen, but like any woman, Naomi was very pleased to realize that men still noticed her and showed genuine interest. Meanwhile, Vincent didn't give up. At every meeting, he tried to engage her in conversation, often telling inappropriate and crude stories, trying to amuse Naomi. Perhaps that could have been the end of it, but a very unpleasant incident occurred that turned everything upside down. One evening, returning home from work, Stephen noticed that the house wasn't cleaned, the dirty laundry lay unwashed, and a warm dinner wasn't waiting for him on the table. Surprised and quite upset, one can't blame Stephen, as he grew up in a family where almost all the household chores were done by the homemaker, his mother. He expressed his dissatisfaction to Naomi, who, not really listening to him, continued to get ready for her next trip to the gym. Not expecting such a reaction, Stephen became even more agitated, and Naomi, being quite emotional herself, responded even more sharply. The conflict couldn't be nipped in the bud, and unable to bear it, Naomi slammed the door and ran to the gym. Arriving at the gym, Naomi tried to vent all her anger on the punching bag, but this plan proved fruitless. Distraught, she went to the pool to relax a bit. Upon entering, she saw Vincent, who noticed that Naomi didn't look very well and approached her to ask what had happened. Somehow, one thing led to another, and Naomi found herself in Vincent's bed. Returning home, she tried to act as if neither the argument with Stephen nor the incident with Vincent had happened. It seemed that Stephen noticed nothing. Some time passed, Naomi and Stephen's relationship improved, and she had almost forgotten what happened with Vincent. Her visits to the gym also stopped. However, after a while, the unpleasant story resurfaced that it turned out that Vincent's moral and professional qualities were unacceptable. Whenever he had the chance, especially in male company, he loved to brag about which of his clients he had managed to seduce. And it so happened that once, while talking about his conquests, he decided to mention Naomi and even managed to take a photo. During one of these gatherings, Andre, a good acquaintance of Stephen, was present. Naturally, recognizing his friend's wife among Vincent's trophies, Andre faced a dilemma. On one hand, he needed to tell Stephen, as no man would want to be cuckolded, but on the other hand, Andre knew that first, he could destroy a family. He had often heard how well Stephen and Naomi lived and their family was frequently cited as an example, and second, he might not be believed and would end up being blamed for the story. After several days of torment, Andre realized he couldn't keep silent anymore and called Stephen for a talk, where he told everything he had heard personally from Vincent. He even wanted to show the photo, but Stephen refused, believing the word. Stephen couldn't believe his ears. His Naomi had cheated on him with some gym guy. He didn't know what to do next. At work or at home, he was at a loss. He loved Naomi very much, but forgiving infidelity was against his moral principles. Stephen could no longer stay silent and decided to directly ask Naomi about everything. She burst into tears and confessed everything, begging for forgiveness. She couldn't even imagine how she could justify what she had done. But, as strange as it might sound, Stephen asked her to stop crying and said that he could forgive her this time, but if it happened again, Naomi wouldn't have any more chances, despite his boundless love for her. Of course, after these words, Naomi's tears flowed again, but this time they were tears of joy. 4 months later, on Stephen's birthday, he found a beautifully wrapped box on his nightstand early in the morning. He shook it but couldn't guess what might be inside. Naturally, he understood that Naomi had prepared this gift for him. Just as he was about to open it, he noticed Naomi, who congratulated him on the holiday and asked him to open the present she had prepared. Stephen, with curiosity, began to do so. Opening the box most carefully, he found a pregnancy test with 2 lines. But what happened next, that's a completely different story. Part 2. After opening the box once again, Stephen made sure that his vision was not failing him, and indeed, inside lay a pregnancy test with clear lines that spoke of Naomi soon becoming a mother. Doubts tormented Stephen. It seemed like he had forgiven Naomi and given her a second chance, but at the same time, he did not want to make a mistake, and if this was not his child, he did not want to accept Naomi with someone else's baby. Doubts did not leave Stephen in peace, and a decision formed in his mind. Instantly requesting time off from work, he rushed to a private clinic to get the tests done. After making arrangements with the doctor, he asked for the test results to be ready by the evening. Just a couple of hours later, he received a phone call, and a pleasant woman on the other end of the line offered Stephen to come to the clinic for the test results, which were already prepared. Arriving at the clinic, Stephen proceeded to the doctor, who, with great regret, informed Stephen that he could not have children. Furious beyond belief, Stephen thanked the doctor and headed towards the exit. A multitude of thoughts swirled in Stephen's mind, which he couldn't seem to control. Upon arriving at work, Stephen began to calm down a bit, as he always felt comfortable behind the wheel, and driving allowed him to relax. A cunning thought crept into his mind, how to get revenge on his unfaithful wife, and Stephen started to plan his actions. Lost in thought, the end of the workday approached. Now, Stephen was heading home to Naomi. As soon as he opened the door, he caught the aroma of braised duck, his favorite dish. Every year on his birthday, Naomi invariably prepared roasted duck. However, the enticing scent couldn't placate the angered man. Approaching Naomi and trying not to show any emotion, he gently asked, "Whose child is this?" Naomi looked at him in surprise and replied, "Of course, it's yours." She lovingly held on to him and said that he would soon become a father. Unable to tolerate such treatment any longer, Stephen took out the test results from his folder and threw them at Naomi. She looked surprised and started examining the documents, realizing what they were and what they meant. Confused, Naomi looked at Stephen and began to insist that it was a mistake and that the child inside her was indeed his. Not willing to listen to Naomi's pleas, Stephen said he had given her a chance, but she hadn't taken it and had betrayed him again. Afterward, he forced the crying Naomi out of the house. Years passed, and Stephen never managed to find himself a woman. In all honesty, after Naomi, his relationship with the opposite sex didn't go well. To forget about the betrayal, Stephen began to drink, initially in small quantities, but with each passing day, he consumed more and more alcohol. He didn't care about what happened to Naomi or her child, it simply didn't interest him. However, one day, after 7 years, Stephen accidentally bumped into his once beloved woman on the street. Seeing a little boy by her side, Stephen was momentarily speechless. Before him stood an exact replica of himself at the age of 6. Flustered, he couldn't find words to respond. Naomi, on the other hand, suggested they go for dinner, introducing the young man standing beside her as Stephen Jr., joyfully announcing his name. During dinner, Naomi shared that she currently lives with her son in a rented apartment and works 2 jobs, but she doesn't complain about her life, as she acknowledges her own fault in what happened to her. With every passing minute, as Stephen looked at the boy, he couldn't comprehend how it was even possible. Why on earth does this child resemble me so strongly? This thought wouldn't leave Stephen's mind throughout the evening. As dinner approached its logical conclusion, Naomi suggested to Stephen that he should finally take a paternity test. Stephen understood that the boy couldn't be his son and agreed. He still couldn't forgive his wife for her betrayal and couldn't resist the opportunity to taunt his unfaithful ex-wife once again. Choosing a day, Stephen received hair samples from Naomi's son and headed to the clinic to submit the biological materials for analysis. To his disappointment, Stephen learned that the test results would only be available in 10 days, 10 long days. Stephen was filled with thoughts. He couldn't have children, but then why did Stephen Jr. resemble him so much? What could be the reason? Again and again, as he examined the boy's photograph, Stephen found more and more similarities between them. There was something strangely familiar about him. On the specified day, Stephen headed to the clinic from early morning. With trembling hands, he took the package containing the test results. He couldn't bring himself to open it. What if it turned out that the boy was his son? How could Stephen live with the fact that he hadn't been a part of his son's life for 7 years, wasting his life away in a nearby bar, drowning his sorrows with 100 grams of whiskey from the bartender? After downing the whiskey with slightly steadier hands, Stephen opened the package and began reading the test results inside. Overwhelmed with anger and the emotions surging within him, Stephen angrily threw the empty glass against the wall. It was indicated with 100% certainty that Stephen Jr. was indeed Stephen's son. Surprised by what he had seen, Stephen decided to check one small detail. He headed back to the clinic and submitted materials to determine if he could have children. By evening, the results were ready. Stephen was astonished when he found out that everything was normal and he could indeed have children. Grabbing the test results, Stephen first went home and then rushed back to the clinic where he had taken the test 7 years ago. Showing both the results from 7 years ago and the recent one, he demanded an explanation. When the administrator finally approached him, all he could say was that such a change was possible. He suggested that perhaps Stephen couldn't have children before, but now everything had suddenly changed. Unsatisfied with this response, Stephen began searching for the lab technician who had processed his biomaterials the last time. Upon finding the man, Stephen learned that someone from the clinic staff might have accidentally switched a few test tubes by sheer chance the last time. Unfortunately, such things do happen, as we are all human beings. Perhaps that's why Stephen received the test results of another man. Stephen couldn't hold back his tears due to this grave error by an unknown person. He had lost 7 years of his son's life, jeopardized his health, as the alcohol had taken its toll, and sacrificed his career. In addition to all this, he had driven away the woman whom, painful as it was to admit to himself, he had loved all these years. After regaining his composure, Stephen called Naomi and proposed to meet up. She happily agreed, inviting him to her place. She purchased a bottle of champagne and a bouquet of flowers for the occasion. Stephen arrived at Naomi's, entered her apartment, and presented her with the champagne and flowers. He began to apologize, but Naomi promptly stopped him, stating that she was equally at fault and suggested they leave all the grievances in the past. Stephen gladly accepted, immediately proposing that Naomi and Stephen Jr. move in with him. She had no objections. During their conversation, Stephen learned that Naomi had never married, as she had been waiting and hoping for the day when Stephen would come to his senses and return to her and their son. They could talk for hours, and it seemed as if Stephen and Stephen Jr. had lived side by side their whole lives, understanding each other effortlessly. And so, on another birthday, Stephen headed to work, carrying a little box with an unknown content that Naomi had given him in the morning, asking him not to open it. Deciding that he had had enough unexpected surprises, Stephen chose not to tempt fate and refrain from opening the gift prematurely. When he came home, he was enveloped in the familiar and beloved aroma of braised duck. Entering the room, he heard birthday wishes from Stephen Jr. and Naomi. Stephen embraced his wife and son, realizing that at that moment, he was the happiest person on the planet. As we conclude our journey into the world of human relationships, please remember to subscribe, like, and share our content. Thank you for your support, and we look forward to seeing you in the next story.